My name is Eliana, and when I was 29 years old, my entire world collapsed overnight. One day, I was living in a house I'd helped build with love and trust. And the next, I was standing on the cold pavement with nothing but a torn suitcase and a heart full of betrayal. My marriage had lasted 5 years, 5 long years in which I had trusted a man who, in the end, made sure I walked away with nothing. My ex-husband, Daniel, was wealthy, powerful, and had connections in every corner of the city. When we divorced, he unleashed his expensive lawyers on me like wolves. I watched helplessly as they twisted every memory, every shared investment, and every promise until the court documents made me look like a parasite who deserved nothing. The judge sided with him. The house, the car, the savings, even the little art studio I'd built for myself, all of it went to him. When the court hearing ended, Daniel didn't even look at me. He walked past me with his arm around his new girlfriend, a younger woman who used to work as his assistant. My fingers trembled as I held the divorce papers. My life had been neatly erased in black and white ink. At first, I stayed with a friend. But pity has an expiration date, and after 2 months of sleeping on couches and desperately applying for jobs, my welcome ran out. I sold my jewelry, then my clothes, and finally the only car I had left. Job interviews led nowhere. Every time they saw Eliana Hartwell on the resume, they hesitated because Daniel had already poisoned my reputation in the industry. It wasn't long before I found myself wandering the streets, clutching a single duffel bag, wondering how someone who once hosted dinner parties in a mansion could be digging through trash for half-eaten sandwiches. I remember one cold evening when I sat on a broken bench near the train station, watching people hurry by in warm coats, not one of them sparing me a glance. I was invisible now, forgotten, and Daniel had made sure of it. That night, as I huddled near a dumpster behind a bakery for warmth, something inside me hardened. I realized Daniel hadn't just taken my money, he had taken my dignity. He wanted me broken, humiliated, and gone. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction forever. I didn't know how, but I promised myself, one day, he would see me again, not as a woman he crushed, but as the storm that returned. The very next morning, while digging through a trash bin behind a supermarket, I heard a calm but firm voice behind me. "Excuse me, are you Eliana Hartwell?" My heart stopped. Nobody called my name anymore. I slowly turned around to see a well-dressed woman in her late 50s, holding a leather folder. Her eyes were kind but sharp, like someone who carried both power and purpose. "Yes?" I answered cautiously, half expecting a scam or some cruel prank. She smiled in a way that felt unsettlingly genuine. "I've been looking for you," she said. "Your great uncle in New York just passed away. He left you everything, his mansion, his vintage car collection, and a $47 million estate. But there's one condition." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. $47 million? A mansion? It sounded like the kind of story desperate people made up to escape their misery. I don't understand," I stammered. She opened her folder and showed me legal documents with my name printed clearly. "He had no children," she explained. "You are his closest living relative. But to inherit everything, you must return to New York within 10 days to sign the will in person." My hand shook as I held the papers. My great-uncle was a man I'd met only twice in my life. He was a distant, mysterious figure who had spent most of his life in Manhattan. I had no idea he'd remembered me, let alone made me his sole heir. That day marked the moment everything shifted. The woman, whose name was Margaret, arranged my flight, clothes, and accommodation for the trip. As the plane lifted off the runway, I stared out the window with a mix of fear and hope. A week earlier, I was homeless. Now I was being flown across the country to inherit a fortune. But as exciting as it sounded, deep inside, a flame of vengeance flickered. Because with money comes power. And with power comes the ability to make people remember who they betrayed. When I arrived in New York and stepped into the mansion, I felt like I'd entered another universe. Marble floors, gold-rimmed staircases, sparkling chandeliers, everything screamed wealth. My uncle had left a life fit for royalty, and now it was mine. As I walked through the echoing halls, I thought of Daniel. I remembered the smug grin on his face when the judge gave him everything. I remembered the moment he told me, "Nobody wants a homeless woman, Eliana." Now, I was standing in a mansion worth more than everything he had ever owned. That night, after signing the will, I sat in the mansion's library, surrounded by leather-bound books and silence. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window. Not the broken woman by the dumpster, but a woman reborn. I knew exactly what I wanted to do next. Daniel had taken everything from me once. Now I was going to return the favor, not with anger, but with calculated precision. I wasn't just going to reclaim my dignity. I was going to make sure he'd never forget the name Eliana Hartwell again. The transformation didn't happen overnight. After inheriting the mansion and fortune, I spent the first few weeks quietly rebuilding myself. I hired advisors, lawyers, and a personal assistant, not to flaunt my wealth, but to understand every corner of my new world. I studied my great-uncle's businesses, his network, and his holdings. I discovered that he had invested in several major real estate companies across the city. One of those companies, ironically, was the very firm where Daniel had built his reputation. It was almost poetic. The path to my revenge was already paved within the empire I'd inherited. The first step was silence. I didn't contact Daniel. I didn't announce my inheritance publicly. I moved strategically, becoming an invisible storm. Through my lawyers, I purchased shares in his company quietly, piece by piece, until I became a significant silent partner. Daniel had no idea that the woman he'd thrown out like garbage was now sitting at the financial core of his world. I watched him from a distance, reading press releases and corporate newsletters, seeing his smug face in magazines. Every article talked about his upcoming promotion to vice president, a title he believed would secure his power permanently. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was already shifting. Over the next 3 months, I began weaving myself into the city's upper circles. I hosted elegant charity galas at the mansion, where politicians, CEOs, and influencers gathered beneath my chandeliers. My name, Eliana Hartwell, became whispered among the elite, not as the broken ex-wife, but as the mysterious heiress with poise and wealth. Daniel's colleagues attended my events, unaware of our connection. At each gala, I dropped subtle hints about new business directions, charitable partnerships, and leadership reshuffles. The real game was psychological. I wanted Daniel to hear my name through others, to feel my presence without ever seeing me. And it worked. By month 4, I knew through mutual acquaintances that Daniel was becoming uneasy. "Have you heard about this Eliana Hartwell?" Someone had asked him at a board meeting, according to a report I received from a contact inside. "She's the new investor with big plans. Some say she might shake things up." I imagined the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He'd spent months believing I was rotting on the streets. Now the ghost of his past had returned, but not as a beggar, as a shadow in his boardroom. The next phase required precision. I arranged to meet the current CEO of Daniel's company, a dignified older man named Robert, under the pretense of discussing future investments. Over an elegant dinner, I laid out a proposal, restructuring certain departments, introducing fresh leadership, and increasing overall profits. He was impressed. I subtly pointed out some of Daniel's recent reckless decisions, masked as business concerns. I didn't insult Daniel directly. I simply planted seeds of doubt delivered with calm elegance. Robert, intrigued, invited me to join the board officially. I accepted, of course. When Daniel walked into the boardroom for the first time and saw me seated at the long table, perfectly dressed, composed, and with my nameplate gleaming in front of me, his face froze for just a second. But in that second, I saw everything: shock, confusion, and a flicker of fear. I offered him a polite, measured smile, the kind of smile that said, "I'm untouchable now." The board meeting continued as if nothing had happened. He couldn't show weakness in front of his peers. That was part of the psychological game. Make him question his reality while I maintained impeccable grace. Over the following months, my influence grew. I never attacked him directly. Instead, I introduced new projects that highlighted his flaws. When he proposed ideas, I gently countered them with better, more strategic alternatives, always supported by data, charm, and alliances I had carefully built. Slowly, he lost support. His colleagues began turning to me for guidance, regarding him as outdated, impulsive, and too emotional. It wasn't long before whispers started circulating that maybe Daniel wasn't vice president material after all. Outside the boardroom, I made sure he encountered my presence in subtle, unnerving ways. The luxury car I drove was from his favorite brand, but a newer model. The charity gala billboards around the city bore my name in elegant gold letters. Positioned near his office, once, as he exited a building surrounded by journalists, my limousine glided past. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't wave, but he saw me, and I saw the way his confident posture faltered for just a moment. Month 7 was when the cracks became visible. His projects started failing because the board no longer trusted his leadership. Deals he expected to close were rerouted through my contacts instead. He began to make mistakes, public mistakes, trying to prove his worth. I didn't need to destroy him. I simply let him unravel under the pressure of my silent presence. I attended board meetings like a queen watching a chess match I'd already won. Every move he made, I anticipated. Every reaction, I controlled by doing nothing but being strategically present. Finally, in month 9, the board voted to demote Daniel from his executive track, citing leadership concerns. Robert personally offered me the role he had been aiming for. I accepted with calm grace as Daniel sat across the table, his knuckles white against the armrest. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak to him directly. That silence was louder than any insult. It told him, "This is what happens when you underestimate me." Later that evening, as I stepped out of the building, I saw him standing outside, watching my car pull up. He looked smaller, almost lost, the same way I must have looked the day he left me on the street. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't stop. I entered my car and disappeared into the night, leaving him surrounded by the shadows of the empire he once thought he controlled. By the time winter rolled back around, Daniel was a shell of the man who had once walked past me in the courtroom with that smug grin. My revenge hadn't been loud. It had been quiet, patient, and razor sharp. Every move I made had been calculated, like a symphony building toward its final crescendo. I knew that the last act couldn't simply be a victory announcement. It had to be something he would never forget. The opportunity presented itself during the company's annual investor gala. It was the grandest event of the year, attended by industry titans, media outlets, and powerful figures from every corner of the city. This was the night when executives showcased their triumphs. Investors mingled over champagne, and reputations were either cemented or shattered. The board had asked me to give the keynote speech, a request Daniel once believed would be his destiny. The irony was delicious. The mansion's ballroom glittered under golden chandeliers. I wore a midnight blue gown, tailored to perfection, radiating the elegance of someone completely in control. Every head turned as I entered. People whispered my name as though it carried weight, and it did. Daniel was already there, standing near the bar, trying to blend into conversations that no longer centered around him. His once commanding aura had thinned into nervous politeness. When it was time, I took the stage with calm grace. Cameras flashed, the crowd fell silent. My speech began with gratitude, thanking the board, the employees, and the investors for believing in new leadership and fresh vision. Then, with subtle precision, I shifted the tone. I spoke about betrayal in business, about how underestimating certain people can lead to downfall. I didn't mention Daniel's name. I didn't have to. Every person in that room, including him, knew exactly who I was referring to. My words were elegant, layered, and laced with a quiet power that no insult could match. As I finished, the crowd rose in applause. Daniel clapped too, his face tight, forced. But the real blow came later. After the gala ended, the company made an announcement that had been months in the making. We were merging with a rival firm. And the rival firm's CEO, a woman named Victoria, had once been rejected by Daniel years earlier when she applied for a job. She remembered him well. Together, Victoria and I had crafted a new structure where Daniel's department would be dissolved entirely. His role wasn't being demoted this time. It was being erased. The next morning, Daniel was summoned to the boardroom. He walked in expecting to negotiate. Instead, he was handed termination papers. I sat at the head of the table, elegantly sipping tea as Robert read the decision. Daniel's voice cracked when he tried to defend himself. "You can't just cut me out," he said. "I built this place." I met his eyes for the first time in months, calm, unshaken. "No, Daniel," I replied evenly. "You built it on other people's backs. And then you burned the bridges. All I did was walk across the ashes you left behind." There was no anger in my voice, just truth. That made it hurt more. He looked at me as if finally realizing the scale of the game he'd lost. This wasn't a courtroom where he had lawyers to crush me. This was my boardroom now, my world. After the meeting, I didn't watch him pack his things, but I made sure his exit wasn't quiet. His termination was publicized in industry news as part of the merger restructuring. Reporters covered the story widely, painting it as the fall of a once promising executive who failed to adapt. At every charity gala, every conference, his name became synonymous with the man who lost everything to Eliana Hartwell. Weeks later, as I was leaving the office one evening, I found him standing outside the building. Much like I had all those months ago, his suit was wrinkled, his confidence shattered. He tried to approach me, perhaps to beg or blame. I simply stepped into my limousine, lowered the window just enough, and said quietly, "I don't destroy people, Daniel. They destroy themselves when they underestimate me." Then I rolled the window up and drove away, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. the exact position I'd once been in. Only this time, I held the power. Months passed, and I flourished. Under my leadership, the company expanded, new opportunities arose, and my name became a symbol of resilience and strength. Daniel faded into obscurity, unable to find another executive role. He had been publicly outplayed, not through aggression, but through intelligence, patience, and elegance. One spring afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Daniel. A single sentence, "You were right. I never saw you coming." I smiled as I folded the letter and locked it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. My revenge had never been about shouting or proving myself to the world. It was about rising so high that the man who once threw me away had to look up to see me. And that's exactly what I did.